Okay. Show me.
Hi there guys, welcome back to the Dutch SE channel. Thank you very much for tuning in for a video about this here system from ZOHD, the Kopilot with a K Lite. And this is a flight stabilizer and maybe a rescue get you out of trouble system. And it also should be pretty easy to set up, contrary to maybe iFlight setups or more complicated autopilot systems. So yeah, this is from ZOHD. You probably know ZOHD from their flying wings, mostly, well, FPV airplanes. And okay, and the Kopilot Lite. Does that mean there's also a Kopilot Heavy? No, this is basically ZOHD testing the waters to see if there's interest in a system like this. I think there is. And maybe if there is a demand for a more elaborate system than this one. You do see a GPS receiver over here, so this is not only a gyro or stabilizer, it will also get you out of trouble when needed, like I mentioned before. So in this video I'm gonna show you and tell you how to use this, how to install it and use it. And also I've seen a couple of how-to videos on this system and other stabilizers, gyros, autopilot systems, and they omitted one or two, well, at least one important, really important step, which I will not omit in this video, obviously. So I'm gonna leave this box shut for a minute first, because the first step you really want to take when installing and using a system like this is testing whether your airplane actually flies without that stabilizer. See, once you install that stabilizer in your airplane, that stabilizer might mask bad behaviors of your airplane. Maybe there's some inherent problem with your airplane, maybe the elevators run stiff. And well, actually in this plane the elevators did run stiff. Maybe there's a twist in your wing. You won't know if you go ahead and install that stabilizer right away and fly it. Again, that stabilizer will mask any bad tendencies of your airplane. Wrong CG, too tail heavy, too nose heavy, and your airplane won't run as efficient, but you will never know probably, because you've got a stabilizer which solves that problem for you. So again, that's the first step you take. And again, I've got a ZOHD plane here, but that's more of a coincidence. We'll install the stabilizer in this airplane, but I flew it without it first. So what you see here is actually the onboard recording. This ZOHD Nano Talon of mine has a Runcam split version 2 in it. And this is the best way to see whether the plane flies well and how stable it is, basically. So that's what you're looking at right now. This is the onboard recording. I didn't have a head cam on for this flight. So I did actually no trimming whatsoever for this flight. This is the main flight with this airplane. And as you can tell, pretty stable. I also have to add that there was hardly any wind to speak of, which is uncommon for the Netherlands, as you probably know. So you tell me what you think. Again, I didn't do any trimming. This was the plane as it came out of the box, plus some minor tweaks. If you know about the Nano Talon EVO, you know that again the elevator runs stiff. So I slit the hinge approximately 50%, I think, close to 50%, and that kind of solved the entire problem. And that's how I'm flying it here. This is on a 1600 4S. I could definitely run the plane on a bigger LiPo, but I think the flight time will be more than adequate like this. Again, I didn't have to trim out the plane at all, so that I know that the plane will run pretty efficiently. I can always run a bigger LiPo later on, maybe add a camera or whatever. Okay, so that worked out very, very well. However, well, again, if the plane would have had any kind of problem, if I wouldn't have altered the elevator, I wouldn't have known about that problem if I went ahead and installed that stabilizer right away. Okay, so we've got our baseline set. We know that the platform, the airplane we're going to be installing this stabilizer in, runs well. Let's see how you go ahead and install this stabilizer. So, the ZOHD Kopilot Lite, what do you actually get for your money? Here is what you get for your money. You get a nice metallic decal from ZOHD, very, very nice. You get a small little screwdriver, which actually isn't meant for installation, but to change settings. See, there are some potentiometers on this controller over here, and you change the actual settings with this little screwdriver. So in this case, the cheap screwdriver is actually useful. Yeah, so in the center over here is the actual flight controller or stabilizer, or the Kopilot in this case. And in a minute we'll see how you actually install it. Here is a GPS receiver. So I think this having a GPS in the package might have people think that this is a flight controller, in the sense that you can do automated flights, planned flight missions. That's not the case. This is basically a safety net. You can do automatic return to homes or geofencing with this GPS because it has a GPS. That's all it's for. No planned missions. But that also makes the installation a lot simpler. And that's basically the selling point of this Kopilot Lite. It's simple to install. Much simpler than other flight controllers. For instance, iNav based systems. You get some double-sided sticky tape to mount the stabilizer. And you get a wiring loom with which you can hook up your receiver. Now, I won't be using this. I'll actually be using an S-Bus receiver. A small little S-Bus receiver. Doesn't come in the kit, but you can use either. So a traditional PWM receiver, you can use that for this stabilizer. And in that case you'd be using this wire loom. Or you can use an S-Bus receiver, which is what I'll do. Okay, how do you actually install and configure this? Okay, now you could actually opt to mount the stabilizer right away in your airplane if you've got room to spare in your airplane and you can access things easily. For the purpose of this video, I'm gonna assemble things on the bench here so you can actually see things. Okay, GPS, pretty simple. And that connector only goes in one way. So, we've got ourselves a GPS. Then there's this controller board, and that's meant to change settings of this stabilizer. So I'm gonna hook that up over here. Settings, pretty simple, only goes in one way. There you go. Can't be missed. And then there's this PWM connector. Again, that's not what I'm going to be using. That's where that wire loom comes in. I'm going to be using this S-Bus receiver, which has a single strand, as you can tell. And the stabilizer has an input for that over here. From your left, the first set of 3 pins, S-Bus. So purpose built, and the top row is signal, so that's where your white or grey or yellow strand goes. There you go. I now have a receiver hooked up to my stabilizer. To power it, you obviously need the ESC from your airplane. And that also means that this flight controller or stabilizer will control your throttle. Yeah, personally I'm not a fan of that. In other stabilizers I've used, I never hook up the throttle to the stabilizer itself. I very much like to stay in control of the throttle. Again, this stabilizer, for instance, is return to home, and geofencing needs control over the throttle. And it's also the way this stabilizer is powered. So I've got an ESC over here, a random ESC, and I'll plug that into the throttle channel, which is the 1/2/3 after the receiver. Right, so the first set of pins is S-bus, then the second one is aileron, third one is elevator, then throttle. The last signal in for your control surfaces is rudder, and the last set of pins is auxiliary. We'll get to that in a second. Now actually, let's get to that right away. See, at this point you need to set up your radio. And yes, you need to set up your radio now, at this point in the installation. So, let's take a look at my radio. Alright, here is my FlySky PL18 Paladin radio, which is what I'll be using for this airplane. And basically, long story short, you need to set up a conventional airplane. Even though your plane might have a V-tail, in fact my plane does have an V-tail, that'll be taken care of by the flight controller itself. So the setup in your radio should be completely plain, normal T style of tail and ailerons, and that's it. So yeah, what can I tell you? Model display servos. Here's my servo output. And stick right, stick left, aileron, elevator, throttle and rudder. Super duper simple, very basic, the way a lot of airplanes are set up. However, there's one addition: you need to have a 3-position switch for your flight modes. The flight controller, this Kopilot Lite, can do automated, well, self-leveling basically. You can have acro, in which you have basically full control over the pitch and yaw and such. And you can either have return to launch or geofencing. So that's the third flight mode, if you will. So I've got it set up over here on a 3-position switch. And obviously you can set up any switch you'd like. I've chosen this one, and it needs to be a 3-position switch, and that's all, and it should be assigned to channel 5. And that's it. Any other channel your airplane might need, for instance for flaps or landing gear, those won't run through the stabilizer, obviously. Well, obviously, those won't run through the stabilizer. And that's it. That's the radio setup, right? Basic 4 channels plus a mode switch, 3-position, and that's it. The next thing we'll need to do is actually tell our stabilizer what type of airplane we have. Is it a flying wing? Is it maybe an airplane with a V-tail, such as my plane? Or does it have a conventional T-tail? Now, we first set up our radio because the flight controller needs to be in stabilized mode. And hopefully you can see the green and the red LEDs. The red LED is blinking, whereas the green one isn't blinking. And that's what we want. If the green one would be off, like so, we'd be in manual mode, so in acro mode. In this mode we can do whatever we want with the airplane, basically. Or if that green one would also be blinking, now we're basically in return to home or geofencing mode. Depends on which you've chosen. So we don't want the green LED to blink. We can't select the airplane type like this. We don't want it to be off, like so. We want it to be lit constantly. And that's controlled by your flight mode again. So with the green LED constantly on, it's in stabilized mode, and only in that mode can you choose the type of airplane you have. Right? So again, that's why we set up the transmitter first, so we can actually choose our flight mode. Next thing we'll do is we can cycle through the types of airplanes with this little button on the controller. There's one button on the controller, a metallic looking button, and you long press that button to cycle through the 3 types of airplanes. So if you long press it once, the green LEDs will display a different configuration. Now, regrettably, the two green LEDs you see over here might not be super duper apparent in the video, but I'll put a diagram on screen for you right now. It's from the manual. There are two green LEDs and one blinking red one. And the blinking red one we'll get to later. That's a status LED, not important at this moment. The two green LEDs display the current configuration of your airplane, the type of airplane you've chosen. Right? So you would think, because we are looking at the flight controller from behind, this arrow over here points to the nose of our airplane, you would think that the left LED is LED 1 and the middle one, the second one, is LED 2. And it is regrettably not. This configuration of LEDs is upside down. Yeah. So of the two green LEDs, the right one on that side is LED number 1. And the left one on that side is LED number 2. So if you are, if you reference the manual, here is that manual, or part of the manual, this diagram is upside down. Just so you know. It's definitely confusing, but hopefully after seeing this video you'll know. And okay, on my flight controller or stabilizer, both green LEDs are now lit. And that means, I'll put the diagram on screen again, and that means that it is a flying wing and or delta, which is incorrect, obviously. I don't have a flying wing or delta. In this case I have a V-tail. So that means that LED 1 should be lit, right? And LED 2 should be off. So we're gonna long press this button over here. And now actually I'm at LED 1 is off and LED 2 is on, which is, let me see, that's T-tail. So now I'm in a conventional airplane type configuration. Let's try that again. Long press, approximately 2 seconds press on that button. Again, you can only do this once the stabilizer is in stabilized mode. You can actually, I found a way of doing it differently, but I won't get into that. I won't confuse you more than you should. This works, right? Put the stabilizer in stabilized mode and then 2 second presses on that set button and it'll work, as you can hopefully see. So now the middle or the left for me, left for you, right? Yeah, confusing, I know, sorry. So LED 1 is actually on right now and the one on that side, LED 2, is off. And guess what? That's a V-tail configuration, which is what I have. So I've now cycled through the 3 airplane types and I'm now at the correct one. And that's it. That's how you choose the type of airplane you have with this set button over here. Okay, to confuse you a little more still, sorry about that, but I've come across PDFs online with different configuration setups. So you might be looking at a PDF online and have this entire configuration of airplane types be different. What I've done is use the manual that came with my stabilizer. And that's the way to go, I think. At least on initial setup. If it doesn't work out, maybe you should have a look at the PDFs online. But I think that the manual that actually comes with your stabilizer should be the correct one. Maybe there's been different versions of this stabilizer, could very well be. So yeah, that might be a source of extra confusion. And suddenly things look completely different. As you can tell, I've now built the stabilizer into my airplane. As this is the time to do so, see, we're gonna have to check if our inputs correspond to the correct movement. And if they don't, we'll have to reverse channels in our radio. So what you now do, if you haven't hooked it up in your airplane yet, you obviously hook up the throttle to the throttle output. And if you have a conventional airplane, hooking up your servos is super simple, of course. You've got one aileron output. So if your airplane has two wires for the ailerons or servo cables for the ailerons, you'll have to use a Y splitter to hook it up to the stabilizer. Then the elevator, well, again, for a conventional airplane it's super simple. Elevator, then your throttle and a rudder. Pretty simple. If you run a delta wing or a flying wing, you'll hook up the left elevator or elevon to the aileron channel and the right elevon to your elevator channel on this stabilizer. And if you have, like me, a V-tail airplane, obviously you still hook up the ailerons to the aileron output, then the left elevator to the elevator output and the right elevator to the rudder output. And that's it. Those are the three types of airplanes or configurations the stabilizer supports. Okay, at that time you can check whether your outputs of the radio correspond again with the physical movements of your airplane. So aileron right should bring up the right aileron. Aileron left should bring up the left aileron. Elevator up should pull up both elevators. You can't see that, but both of my elevators are pulled up and down, down, and rudder moves both of my elevators. Now, if any of the channels is reversed, so doesn't correspond to your inputs, then you should reverse it in your radio. So not on the stabilizer, but in your radio. So if you got that done, we're gonna calibrate actually the stabilizer. And in my airplane, I actually have to raise the nose a little. Now, if you find that in flight your elevator has a tendency to drop the nose a little or lose altitude, you can simply recalibrate your airplane with a little wedge under the nose, raising the nose a little, and that'll offset the plane losing altitude. So I'm gonna put something under the nose and I'm angling the plane back approximately 1 degree or so. Right, so what you then go and do, you put the airplane in stabilized mode, like so. Green LED is lit constantly. Then you move both sticks down and in, like so. And after a few seconds, the LEDs will start to blink. I hope you'll be able to see that. Just hold on to your sticks. After a couple of seconds, things will stop blinking, like so. By that time you've got your airplane's stabilizer calibrated. So basically what you've now done is tell the stabilizer what is level. I hope that makes sense. So again, if you find that your airplane loses altitude a little or a lot, while you don't give any input, so if you have your hands off of the sticks, then you simply have to recalibrate the gyro, the stabilizer, with a little wedge under the nose, and that should take care of that problem. Alright, so we've now calibrated the stabilizer itself. We now have to calibrate it to our radio, basically tell it what the center stick on all axes is. And to this I should add that you should do this step again. Yeah, after trimming out your airplane in flight. So basically what you'll do after setting up the stabilizer is you'll fly your airplane in manual mode, or in full acro mode, in non-stabilized mode if you will. Trim it out until it's flying level, And with those trim settings you will have to do this calibration again. Yeah. But I'm gonna show you how it's done, just so you know. And to do this calibration you'll have to switch it into stabilized mode. Green LED is constantly on. Then you hold on to the set button on your settings controller. If all is well, you could see my aileron movement. You will have to hold on to that set button for approximately 3 seconds. Let go, and then your ailerons will flap up and down. And that's basically your indication that this calibration is done as well. Simply put your radio in center stick, let go of the sticks basically, and then hold on to that set button for approximately 3 seconds. Your ailerons will flap up and down, and that's that calibration done as well. Now the next thing we need to set up is how the stabilizer actually stabilizes your airplane. To what amount and in what direction. See, it might be correcting things the wrong way around. When it should move the right aileron up, it's moving the left aileron up, and move the elevator down while it should be moving the elevator up. You can set that up with this little controller board you see here. There's one more thing you can do with this controller board, and that's set how the return to home or geofencing would work. And that's where this last dial is for. So the first 2 dials you see here are to set up the ailerons and the elevator. And it's a bit confusing to me, basically, that there's no dial for your rudder. So if you'd see this as a general purpose stabilizer, it could potentially stabilize your rudder the wrong way around. And that would be disastrous. So yeah, this stabilizer might not work for every plane. It's probably specifically designed for ZOHD airplanes. And ZOHD has a lot of flying wings and V-tail airplanes, so I guess this stabilizer will work in all of their airplanes. Again, if you want to use this stabilizer in any other airplane, I can't tell you if it would work. It would probably not work in every setup, just so you know, especially for the rudder. Okay, so I hope you'll be able to see that both of these dials are set to approximately 10 o'clock, 10:30. You can turn these dials with the supplied screwdriver, and if I'd move them past 12 o'clock, to, for instance, 2 o'clock, I'd be effectively reversing the stabilization of that channel. So again, if you find out that the stabilizer stabilizes your ailerons the wrong way around, you would then dial this aileron dial to past 12 o'clock. Where it's now before 12 o'clock, you'd move it past 12 o'clock. And the amount it's moved past 12 o'clock in either direction, so it's now at approximately 10 o'clock. If I'd move it past 12 o'clock at 2 o'clock, I'd basically have the same amount of stabilization, but the other way around. If I'd move this dial to the 9 o'clock position, or even beyond that, I wouldn't be changing the direction. The direction would stay the same. But I'd increase the amount of stabilization. So that's something you'll have to find out after a couple of flights. You simply fly the airplane in stabilized mode. I'd suggest taking off in manual mode, or is that called manual mode? Yeah, manual mode. Then in flight switch to stabilized mode and see how it does. Does it stabilize enough or too much? And then adjust the dial accordingly. So same for the elevator. If the elevator is stabilized the wrong way around, you move this dial past the 12 o'clock position, and the amount it's away from 12 o'clock determines how much it'll stabilize. Okay, so that's the same for these 2 dials. So then we have that third dial. What is it for? What does it do? With this third dial you first of all choose whether you'll have return to home or geofencing. See, you can't change that in flight. Before you take off you either pick return to home or geofencing. You can't have both. So with this dial all the way to the right at approximately 4 o'clock I'd say, which is what I've set it to right now, you will have return to home. So your third flight mode will have the plane fly back to you basically. That's what it comes down to. We'll see that in my flight tests. That's simply set by dialing this dial all the way to the right to 4 o'clock. With this dial set this way you'll have return to home. And that's also the only flight mode I want. Automated flight mode I should say. I don't want geofencing, but maybe you do. Then you move this dial back to 2 o'clock or before it. So you'll dial it to the left, right? Counterclockwise. And the amount you put it past 2 o'clock. So maybe you'll set it to 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock. 10 o'clock. The further you move it before 2 o'clock, the longer your distance, your allowed distance, your geofence will be. And you'll basically have to try that a couple of times. Right? See if at what distance the geofencing kicks in. And what the plane should do is simply turn around and head back to you once you've reached your geofence. That's what it comes down to. So it'll simply limit the distance the plane can fly away from you. If that's a feature you want, you can do that with this stabilizer. And basically, that's everything you need to set up. If you've done all this, you are ready for your first test flight. Again, I'd suggest doing your first flight in manual mode. Then do your trimming. Trim your plane out as you do with any plane, then land it and do the radio calibration again. Pretty simple. Simply hold on to this set button for approximately 3 seconds with the plane in stabilized mode. You'll see the ailerons flap, 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 and then the stabilizer will know what the new center stick positions will be. Alright, so the ZOHD Kopilot Lite. What is your impression? Is it a simple installation procedure? That's basically the objective of this Kopilot Lite, to make stabilization simple to install. So you tell me, was this simple? And probably the first time you try this it won't be simple. Simply do it again. The second time it'll be a lot simpler. Trust me, this was the second time I did it. So yeah, let me see, what more can I tell you? Yeah, this controller board, you can remove it. You don't need to keep it attached in flight. But if your plane has a lot of room, you could install it in your airplane, and that way you'd always have it around if you want to change settings. Might be convenient. Then there's the GPS antenna. You'll have to mount it this side up with the little button thing. That's the top side. It's a bit counterintuitive. I always thought that the side with the text and the status LEDs was the top side, but no, this is how you mount it. Depends on your airplane. My plane has a dedicated mounting spot for a GPS. There's no front or back, left or right to this sensor, only a top and a bottom side. And that is basically it. I hope this was clear enough for you. I will be doing test flights, test demonstrations of the features of this Kopilot Lite in the near future, weather permitting. If you are left with questions, don't hesitate to ask. Hit me up a comment down below. Catch you on the next video. Bye bye.